Today's video does contain some disturbing subject matter, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. Back in the summer of 2008, my parents decided that they wanted to take us kids on vacation to the beach. It was something that we had never done before. We never had the money to go on vacation, but something happened at my dad's work and he ended up getting a major promotion or something, so they wanted to celebrate and do something nice for the family. Now, it was 2008, and I was 14, so I was in that awkward phase between being a kid and a young adult. And let me just say that everything in my wardrobe was black, so I wasn't exactly looking forward to my family bonding time. I'm the middle child and the only girl. My older brother was 17 and my little brother was 8 at the time, so while my parents were talking to my little bro about swimming and building sandcastles and whatnot, I was rolling my eyes thinking that that was dumb and childish. My point is, I was more independent and I wanted to do my own thing more than spend time with them, which is actually what kind of led to what happened. I will say that the beach was beautiful and the whole scenery was quite alluring. One evening, as we were having dinner at a cute little beachside restaurant, I had finished eating and I asked my parents if I could go for a walk on the beach. I wanted to get some alone time just walking in the sand barefoot while listening to my music. I was allowed to go as long as I didn't go too far or stay out too long. So, I quickly grabbed my iPod and started out into the sands. It was as lovely as I'd hoped. The stars, the clouds, the moon, and the water rolling into the sand. The beach was deserted at this point. It was just me and my angsty teenage thoughts. A couple moments into my walk, I went to skip a song on my iPod, and in that half second between it stopping and playing, I heard something. At first, I thought it was part of the track by The Used that I was listening to, but I paused it to check, and the sound persisted. I pulled my earphones out and listened to see what I was hearing, thinking it was another person or an animal or something, and it was then that it kind of clicked in my head what the sound was. It sounded like it was a young child crying. I don't know if I would say that it sounded like a baby, but definitely still really young. I looked around for a moment thinking that I just wasn't seeing the child or family with the crying young one, but there was nobody around at all. I had a weird feeling while I was standing there and listening to it, like something was off, which, yeah, I was hearing a child crying on an empty beach. I started to walk towards the direction of the crying, thinking maybe it was someone's kid that had gotten lost or something. After following it, I found a small cove that had been formed by some larger rocks, and I determined that it was definitely coming from inside the cove. It felt eerily secluded from the rest of the beach, and I was just terrified that this was seriously some little kid that had gotten lost and didn't know what to do, or worse, was abandoned. I hopped down into the cove from the higher rocks to see if I could find him, but when I got down there was no child. Worse yet, the crying seemed to have stopped abruptly. Obviously, I was confused, but as I glanced around and shined my little pocket flashlight into the cove, I was certain that there were no children there. What was there, however, was an old, beat-up, stuffed teddy bear, just lying in the damp sand. It was dirty, with signs of wear and tear, and it certainly had been there for quite a long time. Honestly, It being there alone in the cove made the whole thing more disturbing. I picked him up to see if maybe he had one of those little sound maker things in him, but no, he was just an old, basic, cheap little teddy bear with a blue sweater. No noise maker or anything like that in him, just fluff. I looked around to see if there was some sort of speaker or something that could have been playing the sound, just trying to make sense of it, but there wasn't anything there. For a moment, I just held the bear and stared at him. He was a cute little bear, and I thought about taking him with me, thinking that maybe someone had dropped him earlier, but as I thought about that, something washed over me, and the sound of that crying kind of played in my head. The isolated cove, the crying, the poor forgotten teddy bear, all of it felt off. It kind of felt like I was disturbing something that I wasn't supposed to. I was always into paranormal and spooky stuff, and my mind went to the possibility of the crying sound being from a spirit of a child that maybe lost their life being attached to the bear. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I decided to go ahead and place the bear in the back of the cove, sitting upright so that he could watch the night sky. I actually took one of my bow hair clips off and clipped it to his little sweater. I don't know why I did that, but part of me thought that it would just make him happy. And if he was happy, maybe the spirit could rest a bit easier too. I told him that he was okay and wished him a good night, and went ahead and left the cove. I walked back to my family and I didn't say a word about any of it. Now, looking back, I think I was being a bit silly with how I handled it, but part of me firmly believes that there was a spirit attached to that bear. The crying on the empty beach at night, him just sitting there in the isolated spot, and the fact that there was that certain energy when I thought about taking him, I don't know. It just makes me think that I did the right thing. The whole thing was a bit haunting for sure, and it really does give me chills when I think about it more. Was this some kind of haunted item? Attached spirit? Or was it just a bear and I'm a bit loopy? Who knows? All I know is that it was weird, and there was something about it that made me feel the whole thing was supernatural. And if it was the spirit of a child, I hope that I helped it in some way. I'm a driver for one of those rideshare app services. I got a practically brand new car a year ago, and I thought it would be an easy way to make some extra money. And so far it has. Most of my passengers have been great, but I've had a few that were just unpleasant. I do have a day job, so I usually do this in the evenings or at night, and sometimes during the day on my days off. This particular event took place on a Friday night. I had just dropped someone off and was debating on taking one more, but since it was already pretty late, I instead decided to grab something to eat and head home. I went to a nearby drive-thru, and as I indulged in my fries driving home, I noticed a woman walking down the street, or more so, stumbling. She was pretty obviously intoxicated. She was wearing a dress and carrying heels and a small clutch. Being a woman myself, something made me think that I should stop for her. She could just be making her way home, but there was something inside of me telling me that something was wrong, and I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I heard something on the news about this. So I did a U-turn, slowed down on the side of the road, and rolled down my window. I greeted her, and she jumped as I'd rolled up behind her, startling her, I'm sure. I asked her if she was okay or if she needed a ride. She leaned down and looked into my car, but not in a casing it out kind of way. She seemed suspicious of me, and I really couldn't blame her. How often does a person offer a ride to someone walking down the road like that? I tried to assure her that I was alone, and that I actually worked for the rideshare company, but I just wanted to make sure that she was okay. She said she'd used the same company in the past, but that she had lost her phone. That's why she didn't use it that night. She definitely seemed like she may have been having a rough night, so I again offered her a ride. No cost and no catch. And even asked her if she needed to use my phone to call someone to let them know that she was safe. I thought that this would also make her feel more at ease since, cell phones and calls can be traced. She declined to make the call, but said that she would love a ride and quickly hopped into the back, thanking me. I watched as she buckled in, looking back down the way that she came, and let out what I would say was the biggest sigh of relief. I asked her where I could take her, and she gave me an address that was around 20 plus minutes from where we were. I looked it up when I got home, and that would have been almost 2 hours by foot. I shockingly asked her, "Were you really planning on walking that far, girl?" She let out a small laugh and said that that was the only option she really had, but was worried that she wouldn't make the whole trip. I laughed as well and made a comment about how that was definitely further than I was willing to walk, especially in this awful heat. To which she gave a weaker laugh and said, "Yeah, this heat is definitely one problem, right?" I caught on to what she said, and her inflection told me that there was something else going on. I asked her if she was okay, but she confirmed that she was just tired, so I left it alone. I didn't know her, so I didn't feel it was right for me to pry. I drove in silence for a bit, but it was awkward, so I asked her if she wanted some of my fries. We both laughed, and she took a handful and said thank you. I was probably about halfway to where she asked me to take her, when she suddenly asked, "Actually, could you take me somewhere else first? When we get to my place, I can run in and grab you some cash that I keep at home." She wanted to stop and get something to eat too, and I wasn't really worried about it because I just felt better about getting her home safe. So we stopped and got her something, and she asked if I'd be willing to just eat somewhere with her. At first, I will say that I thought it was unusual that someone would want to eat in a car with a stranger, but again, I've definitely had weirder passengers. So I agreed. I stopped at a nearby park and we ate there and talked. That's when she told me her name and I shared mine. She talked about a park that she remembered going to a lot with her dad when she was a kid, and mentioned how much that she missed it. She even told me about how much her work takes out of her, so she couldn't often do things for fun. That's when she talked vaguely about how she ended up in the situation she was in that night. She said that she went out for a change, but everything quickly spiraled out of control and her ride abandoned her, and then she lost her phone. With the way she was dressed, I assumed that she may have gone to a club or something. Maybe there was a fight that her ride was involved in and so forth. I apologized that she had to deal with all of that and tried to be optimistic about it to cheer her up. It actually seemed to work, as she perked up some and our conversation became lighthearted again. Once we both finished eating, we left the park and made our way to her destination. I remember us talking and laughing and honestly just enjoying the company of a complete stranger up until I pulled up to her house. I asked her if she wanted me to pull into the driveway, as some people prefer I stop on the side of the road. When she didn't answer immediately, I looked back at her and saw her staring out the window towards the house. I could see her eyes darting around as well as her head, as if she was looking for something. I asked her if she was okay, and she quickly responded by asking, "Does it look like someone is standing on my porch?" I strained my eyes to look, but it was a distance, and it was dark, so I couldn't really see anyone. I told her that I couldn't see anyone and asked if she saw someone or if someone was waiting for her, but she didn't respond. I told her that I could wait until she went inside to leave or take her somewhere else if she would feel safer, but she just quietly sat there, staring out the window. I called her by her name, and when she finally answered, she said she would be okay. She smiled and thanked me for everything that night and opened the door. I still waited to make sure everything was okay, but she only got maybe 3 feet in front of my car when I saw a person step out of the shadows of her fencing. I saw her stop in her tracks for a split second, and then she ran back to my car hysterically. "Please, don't leave me here. Please, just take me somewhere else. I swear I will pay you." The urgency and terror in her voice told me all that I needed to know. I burned out of there before she could even buckle up. I asked her who that person was, and she told me that it was her psycho ex-boyfriend. She then broke down crying and telling me about the horrible things he did, and how he was the reason she ended up where she was. She had left him. He followed her to the club that she went to, taking her phone. She got kicked out since she was, quote-unquote, part of the problem, and had no other way home. She never had a ride to begin with. She had used the same rideshare to get there, and she actually thought that he may have been involved with me, which is why she was hesitant to get in. When she finally trusted me, she felt relieved because she didn't know if he would try to snatch her from the street and do God knows what. I was both horrified for her and also relieved that I did stop as the other scenarios swirled in my head. She was visibly shaken up, so I thought I would just drive until she gave me some idea on where to go. Regretfully, I was so involved in her story and watching to make sure that she was okay that I didn't realize the car that was behind me until we stopped at a light. They were so close to me that I couldn't even see their headlights. I paid attention to the car from that moment on and realized they were still following close and making every turn that I did. Then, they turned on their brights, causing both of us to look back. I don't know how she could tell, or if maybe she just knew, but once again she became hysterical, screaming that it was him behind us. I was now terrified myself. I knew at that moment what kind of person he was, but I didn't know what he was willing to do in front of a complete stranger. All I could process was to keep driving. Do not stop, and stay where there could be potential others around to witness whatever he attempted. Apparently he had other intentions because, as I slowed down at another stoplight, I was going to turn without a signal, but he was not slowing down. I embraced myself for him to hit me, but he managed to hit his brakes enough, causing them to squeal, and he stopped before smacking into me. But then he slowly inched his way to my bumper until he was pushing my car into the intersection. We were going to need help to get out of this, and there was only one place that I could think of that would have the right people to potentially help. I grabbed my phone and called 911 as I made my way to a nearby hospital. I told the operator that I was being followed and that the driver was now hitting my car. I told them where I was headed, and they said they would contact the officer that was on duty there. I knew they had police officers at this location. I pulled up to the entrance that the operator told me to get to, and thankfully I saw the officer at the door. I guess the guy didn't see him because he barely parked his car before he was at my window smacking it and telling me to get out. The girl with me was terrified, crying and screaming at this guy to leave her alone. The guy continued slamming my window, and the officer was also approaching, yelling at the man and holding a taser. I was frozen in fear, praying that my window would not give out. After several shouts filled with warnings from the officer, he hit him with the taser, and the guy fell to the ground. By the time he was restrained, another cop showed up and told us that we could safely get out. From there, the cops asked us what all was going on, what all had happened, and we obliged, explaining everything. That's when the girl went into more detail about that night, what all he did, and how she had ended up with a complete stranger. It was obvious that this was not a one-off situation either, which was all the more terrifying. After all was said and done, the cops said that they would take her to a safe place. I told her that I was not worried about getting paid, and she hugged me, thanking me for being so kind. They also got his information from her, as I was still paying for my car, so I definitely had to report the damage. Of course, I was still a bit nosy about the situation, and also wanted to make sure that he got charged with things, so I looked him up. That added to my nightmares. This guy was arrested and charged with battery, B&E, destruction of private property. I assume he must have done some damage at her place, and conspiracy to kidnap. They had found zip ties, duct tape, and trash bags in his car. The thought of this horrified me. The thought that he obviously had these things and was waiting for her in the dark makes me sick to my stomach. If I hadn't picked her up that night, or just left her at her house, to think of what could have happened, and then I wonder if he would have tried to do something to me too, if he would have caught us somewhere with fewer people. My friends always try to get me to think about the better side of that, and keep in mind that I did the right thing, and that's all that matters. But sometimes, I still catch myself looking over my shoulder to make sure that I'm not being followed. This happened to me and my sister back in the early 2000s, but it's still fresh in my memory as it still creeps me out. At the time, I was 12 and my sister was 6. Even though we had several years between us, we were always super close. We did everything together, shared all of our toys, rarely fought, and we also loved playing outside and pretending to be explorers. We would climb trees and collect leaves and branches, crawl under the porch and look for rocks and bugs. We loved trying to make houses out of mud and the supplies gathered for our dolls, and just always had a creative and imaginative mind. So, when my little sister, Katie, started talking about an imaginary friend, no one, including my parents and myself, were surprised, nor did we think it was odd. Katie started bringing up her friend when she was moved into her own room. She technically always had her own room. It was just a nursery, but due to health concerns when she was born, she pretty much stayed in my parents' room until she just randomly decided that she would stay in her own room. It literally went like that. We were getting ready for bed, she went to her own room, and she said she wanted to sleep in her own room. So, they converted her crib into a normal bed, and she started staying in there. So, now I would walk by her room to go to mine, or intentionally be going to hers, and I would hear her talking. I figured she was just playing with her dolls and would walk in her room and ask what she was doing. She would respond saying that she was playing with my friend. At my age, I assumed that she meant her dolls, and then we would continue with our plans. Then, there was one time later at night where my mom told me to go get my sister since dinner was ready. I started towards her room and noticed that her door was cracked open. I was preparing to quickly open the door to scare her, but again, I heard her talking. This time it sounded more conversational, and she seemed to be explaining to someone how to do something. So, instead, I slowly opened the door and saw her standing near her window putting her toys on the ledge. I asked her what she was doing, and she again said that she was playing. I asked her who she was talking to, and she said, Jimmy. I was curious myself, so I asked, "Who's Jimmy?" And she claimed that he was her imaginary friend. I thought that it was kind of silly at my age, but I just went along with it. I asked her how she met him, and she explained how he just showed up in her room one day and that he wanted to play with her. It sounded like a true story for an imaginary friend, so I left it at that. We had several incidents like that, where she would be talking to someone and she would say it was Jimmy. Even while we were around our parents, she would say things like, "Oh, that's Jimmy's favorite color, and Jimmy is afraid of that. I like to play dolls with Jimmy." We all thought it was cute and creative and just left it where it was. I even recall one time when I was playing with Katie in her room, she mentioned Jimmy and I said that I can't wait to meet him one day. She seemed very happy and said that he wanted to meet me too. Being that he was imaginary, I asked her where he was, and she told me, "Well, he's not here right now, but he should be later." So, okay, maybe she just didn't feel up to pretending at that point. So, life goes on as normal for all of us, and before we know it, summer has snuck up on us, giving us more time to play. One day, when we were playing outside, we had started a whole game similar to what I mentioned prior, where we were collecting treasures and making up what they could do. At one point, we stopped and we were just laying in the grass in the backyard, which kind of made us want to sleep out there too. And, thankfully for us, when we asked our parents for blankets and pillows to turn the porch into a fort, my dad gave us one better and set up a tent that we had in the backyard. I just remember being so excited to camp in our yard, and our parents weren't even going to be in there. My parents said they were going to be staying in the back room, which was like a smaller living room. And that room had a door that led to the backyard, so they would be nearby in case we needed them. So, we got ready for bed and grabbed a few things to keep us busy, like coloring books and flashlights, until we fell asleep. We were pretty well nestled in our tent, singing and coloring, and we'd probably been in there for about an hour when I would say that we both were getting pretty drowsy. So we cleaned up, and we snuggled into our sleeping bags, ready to end our night. But, shortly after, I heard someone walking in our yard. I just assumed it was one of our parents checking in on us, so I said, "Hey, who is it?" in a curious and playful tone. And a voice whispered back, "It's me." I could tell that it was a man's voice, but I couldn't tell if it was my dad because of how they were whispering. However, right after he responded, Katie jumped up and quickly unzipped the tent, giggling. As she did this, we were met with the face of a man that I had never met before. However, Katie seemed excited to see this person, and she also answered some questions when she shouted, "Jimmy!" I was shocked and honestly horrified. Jimmy wasn't imaginary, but was a real grown man. He hugged my sister and I asked suspiciously, "Who are you?" And that's when he gave me a sickening smile and said, "I'm Jimmy, your imaginary friend." Like I said, I was old enough to know that imaginary friends were not real. And when I did have one, they didn't look like this. Maybe everyone was different, but mine were always close to my age, and they never had their own voice. I would give them one. Oh, and they were typically 100% imaginary. Like, not real people. I don't know if it makes sense to others, but what's important is that this guy was definitely not imaginary. Unlike Katie, I was scared. I couldn't explain why at the time, other than maybe a strange man was standing in our backyard, but then he asked if he could stay in the tent with us. Instantly, I knew this was not okay. He should not be there, and if we agreed to let him, something bad was going to happen. Unfortunately, Katie said yes, but I simultaneously said no. The disappointed look on his face alarmed me even more. I didn't know if he would try anything if I tried to fight him, so I had to think fast. I told him something about not having another blanket and pillow, so we would have to go get him one first. He said that he wouldn't need one, but I tried to perk back up and insist on it, so I just said, "No, I don't want you to get cold and not want to come back. So we'll be right back. We'll grab some more snacks, too." He smiled and agreed, telling us to just hurry back. I grabbed Katie's arm and pulled her along with me inside, and as soon as we were in, I shook my parents awake and told them about Jimmy being out in the tent, and I tried to make the most terrified face I could to let them know that this was not a joke. Thankfully, they caught on quickly, and my dad dashed out the door immediately. My mom told us to stay on the couch with her, and she was looking out the window toward the tent, so I looked too. I saw my dad enter the tent, walk around it in the yard, until he finally came back in. The guy was gone. My dad asked us what exactly happened, but his tone instantly told me that something was wrong. Katie explained that Jimmy wanted to join us in the tent, and I agreed with her story, further explaining everything. They then called the police and reported it, but, of course, he was long gone. My parents told Katie that she was not allowed to play with Jimmy again, and that if she ever saw him again, she needed to tell them immediately. But we never did see him. Katie and I have talked about this at length as we've gotten older, and we make more and more sense of it each time. She told me about how he just showed up one day at her window, and when she noticed him, she asked what he was doing. She said that he was the one that called himself her imaginary friend, and kept pushing that as a way to get her to not talk about him, or to give an excuse when people like myself or parents asked why he seemed to have such a personality for an imaginary friend. He never did anything to her, thankfully, but he told her that he just wanted to watch her sleep and she was okay with it. Sometimes I'll check police reports, offender lists, and the news to see if I ever recognize a face, but nothing so far. I guess it would probably be better if I did see his face, to at least put my mind at ease that he's not still out there, doing the same thing to other kids. I wanted to share something that actually happened to me just a few weeks ago. It still gives me shivers thinking about it, but after talking to my friends and girlfriend about it, I decided that I should share it with you since you provide me with such great content too. I'm currently living in Texas due to work. I've been here for about 3 months, and I'll be here for another 2 months at least. Sorry to say it, but I'm not a fan. I do not do well in the heat, so if I'm not at work, I'm usually lounging around at home or using the pool at the local gym. At least I have my girlfriend here with me to help me keep in a better mindset. However, during this event, my girlfriend had gone back home to Oregon to see her family, and, of course, I was alone that night and having trouble sleeping. So I wanted to try to go on a walk, hoping to just wear myself out. However, to my surprise, it was a lot cooler than I was expecting, so it immediately made my mood turn around. It was refreshing. I put in my earbuds and started on the sidewalk that lined our quiet suburban neighborhood. I continued walking down the block, and I wanted to really take advantage of the cool air, so I rounded the corner and thought I would walk around the new cul-de-sac that they were developing. They had the foundation laid for 3 of the houses, and the walls on one, but that was about it. But going around the back of the houses, there was a walking trail that looked recently repaved. It made sense enough with the new houses being built. I took the new path expecting to go through the trees and get a serene view. I could hear the crickets chirping over my music. I only had one earbud in, but there were so many, and it was pretty loud. The moon was shining right above the trees, giving the only light source back there. I was just taking in the unusual but welcoming night, until I started to get this weird feeling in my gut. It was the same feeling you get when someone's watching you, or when you know someone is looking over your shoulder. I took out my earbud, stopped where I was, and looked around to see if I could spot someone, or something, looking at me. I didn't immediately see anything, so I continued to walk with my guard up just in case. As I continued forward, I was watching the trees, noticing the imperfections in the trunks, when I saw what I thought was just a twisted trunk until it moved. This stopped me in my tracks. I started staring at this shadow, squinting and straining my eyes to make out what I was looking at. The moonlight was working in this thing's favor, as all I could see was a dark shadow. As I stared at it, the earlier feeling I experienced was now more intense, making me feel pretty uneasy. My first thought was that maybe I walked in on something I shouldn't have. Maybe they were going to try and rob me. Or maybe it was just someone doing the same thing as me and I startled them. I thought the best thing to do was to acknowledge their existence, so if they were planning on something bad, maybe they would think twice if they knew that I knew they were there. So I simply said, "Good evening." When the figure didn't respond, it made me feel even more on edge. I was no longer feeling comfortable walking any closer to them, let alone passing them, so I took a few steps backwards, ready to turn back. However, something was telling me not to turn my back to this thing. I pulled out my phone, ready to turn on the flashlight and hopefully get a video, just in case something happened. But before I could, the shadow finally moved. The movement was unnatural. It was choppy, almost like I was watching a skipping video as this thing reached its hand straight up towards a tree. As I watched its arms, I could see this thing had claw-like fingers at the end of its hands. It seemed to turn towards the tree, letting me see what I think was the side profile, and its spine looked twisted. But one thing I didn't notice until it started moving was the stench. It started as just a sickly sweet odor reminiscent of decaying leaves, but quickly turned into a putrid smell of sulfur. The smell quickly found its way down my throat, making me gag. Between this weird, unnatural smell and this inhuman creature in front of me, I was now shrouded in a sense of dread, and I told myself that I needed to get the hell out of there. I started walking backwards as fast as I could, until I saw the creature seemingly climb up the tree on all fours. It looked like a cat climbing up a tree. My fight or flight instincts finally kicked in full force, and I ran. I kept looking back to make sure that nothing came up behind me, and thankfully nothing ever did. I got out of those trees and was now back in front of the cul-de-sac. The smell was gone, but with my senses now elevated, I realized I could no longer hear a single cricket. I could hear them across my entire walk, but now the air was still and silent. That made me feel like I still wasn't safe, so I quickly walked home, looking in every direction the whole way. When I finally stumbled onto my front porch, I quickly went inside, locking all the doors and turning all the lights on. I didn't want to be in the dark alone anymore. That walk was supposed to help me sleep, and now I was wide awake with no chance of sleeping. Once it was early enough, I called my girlfriend and told her what I had seen. She was worried but thankful that I made it back home in one piece, but we both agreed to not go back there alone, and definitely not at night. What I saw, smelled, and heard is still very vivid in my mind, and it gives me the chills just thinking about it. I've always loved listening to cryptid and creature stories, but I never wanted to experience one. I have no idea what that thing was, and part of me wishes that I would have went through with taking the picture or video, but at the same time, I fear what could have happened if I had stuck around any longer. So, that, my friends, was a collection of some summer night scary stories, or scary summer night stories, however you want to look at it. Scary stories that take place on summer nights. A bit of an addition to the summer collections we've been doing this past few weeks, I suppose. Good collections of stories, the summer can be just as scary as the fall. For instance, it's really hot outside. It's scary to me. Is it scary to you? Because it's scary to me. I firmly dislike the heat. I'm more of a winter bird myself, so yeah. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button, as it does help tremendously. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing, as that also helps tremendously. You can also do things such as super thanks or joining Patreon memberships, which supports the channel further. Never expected, always appreciated though, honestly. And of course, you can always leave me a comment below the video, letting me know your thoughts, how you're doing. Ask me how I'm doing, or don't, it's okay. I'm doing pretty good, that'll be the answer most likely. Things are going alright right now, for the most part. Not perfect, but pretty good. Anyways, friends, I do hope you have a beautiful day, and I hope that I see you again very, very soon. But until then, remember you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you're the best you that you can be. Never forget it, and please don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And, of course, until next time, much love, and sleep well.